First of all, obviously, thank you so much for doing this. Thanks for taking the time.
Of course.
Obviously, appreciate everyone else joining us here today. It's going to be pretty fast paced. We've got 30 minutes with Matt, and we're going to jump into his book, which I'm incredibly excited about, Generation Alpha. But here's where I want to start. I want to talk about the Goonies. I want to go back to 1985 and talk about a movie that I think was like pretty seminal for you. It certainly was very important to me growing up. I am a kid of the 80s, as are you. And of course, the movie's about a scrappy group of misfits who follow a treasure map. They dodge booby traps. They save their town. There are no phones, no filters, just bikes, backpacks, and lots of yelling. Fast forward to today, Generation Alpha is born into a world of location sharing, AI tutors, and pretty much algorithmic everything.
Yep.
And this cultural reference point you talk about in a recent Newsweek interview, and you sort of push this idea of Generation Goonie. So I want to know, first of all, where were you when this movie dropped? What did it mean to you? What is Generation Goonie? And I think most importantly, to kind of kick us off, talk about why you think today's kids are potentially missing without what they're potentially missing without that kind of real world adventure that movie represented.
Yeah, and I actually, the Goonies reference wasn't mine. It was actually the reporter from Newsweek, and I think it was a great insight. But to answer your question, in 1985, I was 10 years old, and I think during that time period, it was just a different world. In fact, like I just saw something on Instagram this morning where there was a game at the end of Michael Jordan's career where Kobe Bryant ran into him and he picked them up, and everyone in the crowd, no one has headphones. And I was just thinking, like, those people witnessed a historic moment and they actually saw with their own two eyes. And that wasn't in the 80s, that was in the 90s or late 90s. And it just shows how fast things have changed. When I tell my kids that when I grew up, there was no internet, it's kind of like if your parents told you when they grew up, they had no electricity. It's kind of feels that way. But to answer your question, in 1985, I was growing up in the suburbs of Philadelphia, and we went outside every day and we played, and we didn't have phones, and our parents didn't have phones. And when they dropped us off at the shopping mall, we had to meet them at a specific time, because if not, they would have no way to get in touch with us, right? And our parents didn't know where we were when we went to go hang out and play, right? We had this type of freedom that I don't think kids have. I think most importantly, and I have two older kids. One is my daughter's a sophomore in college, and my son's going to be a freshman next year. Is that they grew up in public and they had to fail in public. When I didn't win class president in 1993, and I wrote about this in the book, like I lost, nobody cared. I didn't have to see people posting nasty comments about the fact that I lost on Instagram. It was just kind of over, right? And I was able to fail in private. And I think that's a completely different world where obviously we are right now.
So the book opens in a really interesting way, kind of with a little bit of a haunting twist, because the foreword is written by AI, which I know is something that you were very kind of reticent about doing. And I know the intention was not for it to be a gimmick. In many ways, it's sort of part of the broader thesis of the book, right?
Yeah.
But what is the point you were trying to make? Is it a point about kind of consciousness, and you have to read the foreword to know what I mean?
Right.
Or were you just handing the mic to kind of like, the future?
Well, I think it's sort of like it's sort of a forward-looking, almost like signal of where I think the future is headed. Where when I told people that I know that I wrote a book, they're like, "Well, did you have AI write it?" And I'm like, "No, I actually wrote 100% of this book besides the foreword. Where actually, when I wrote Youth Nation 10 years ago, I had a ghostwriter." But this time, I don't know if I'll ever write another, and I wanted it to be my words. I was sort of like really thinking about legacy and my children reading it. I wanted it to be my words, etc. But at the same time, I know that over time, we are going to be using AI for more and more and more. And if this is going to be looked at as a mark in history by anyone who cares, right? I think the fact that showing that I knew where it was headed, I knew about AI's capabilities today, and I did it in a way where AI was writing it. It was actually, I used Claude, Anthropic Claude to write it. Wrote it in like the first person, like, this is what it means to be AI. Don't have emotions. Matt asked me to write this forward. Here's what it meant. And I also think, so it's showing the reader what AI's capabilities are today, but also in the future, when they look back, it'll show that I kind of knew where it was headed.
So let's talk about the alpha paradox, this idea of like agency. And I think the idea of like agency as we move into an increasingly like automated world. And, we talk a lot about the sort of the idea of AI tutors and personalized learning
Yeah.
and the potential that these could be like silver bullet solutions in terms of how they can transform education. But like, at the same time, I think a kid with an algorithm isn't the same as a kid with a teacher. And so, do you think at this moment in time we're potentially over indexing on teaching kids how to use AI before teaching them like how to be human and even how to just learn?
Well, I think it's both. I think that there's some things that are taught in school. And actually, I think it's a big part of curriculum in K through 12, especially where it's this notion of memorization and regurgitation, right? So it's like memorize all these facts and then regurgitate it on the test. And if you're able to do that, you're going to get a high score. And I kind of game the system. I wouldn't like pay attention at all in class. And the night before, I would just chug Red Bull and I would memorize as much as I could because I would be able to keep it in my mind and I would spit it out. And I would probably also regurgitate the Red Bull I drank. And then I would forget about it, right? And I would never, and so I wouldn't, I passed the test, but I didn't really elevate myself. And I think in the past, facts were far more important, the retention of facts and knowledge. Now I would argue that's more commoditized. So the question is, what should it be replaced with? And I think to your point, it's skills like problem solving and creativity and critical thinking, right? Which are things that we're not spending enough time teaching kids how to figure out. Having empathy, how to negotiate, how to manage and grow people, how to deal with resilience, are things that we never learn about. We learn about identifying different types of leads so we can do well on tests. So I think at the same time, I do think understanding these tools is critical because, I don't want to hire anybody right now who doesn't use AI. Why would I? So, and if the whole purpose of school is to prepare people and future-proof them for this coming world, it's only going to become more and more important. So I do think it's a little bit of a barbell approach. On one side, you need to lean into the empathy and the critical thinking and the problem solving. On the other side, you need to be very tactical with the tools. I think where education right now is in the middle, which is neither of those things.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to be a challenge for the existing system to adapt. I mean, look, this book felt very personal to you. As you mentioned, you've got two older kids. You've also got two younger kids as well, who span, all of your kids span two different generations. And of course, your younger kids are very much part of Generation Alpha. But what is your hope for this generation, particularly as you sort of think about the ways in which you can guide them through this this sort of transformational and certainly transitional like moment that we're all experiencing like
Everybody
right now.
is.
I mean, that we've talked a lot on Discourse about this idea that like knowledge and even intelligence is becoming commoditized. So we have to kind of equip and give the skills to our kids, but it's not as straightforward as that. And as a parent, it's hard to know what to do in this moment. So like, how are you preparing and even providing kind of sort of starting to think about how you're going to provide guidance to kind of your younger kids?
Yeah. So, I mean, Toby, we both have been in business around the same time, and we were both blessed to have been running companies through the dawn of the digital era, right? When the internet was first introduced in the big thing, I talk about the book, remembering driving down Highway 101 from San Francisco to Silicon Valley to sell youth marketing services to companies like Alta Vista and eBay and Yahoo, right? And that was a huge change that I wrote about during the book, that Hershey's said they would never stoop down to advertising on computers, right? That's an executive from Hershey told me. So we saw that play out. Then, of course, we saw, the social media era and the mobile era, which is largely Gen Z driven. And we saw Facebook stock plummet when they quote unquote traded, display advertising dollars for, mobile dimes. Like that, their stock dropped dramatically, and they said, we're just focused on mobile, right? And people didn't understand how much we would be doing on mobile devices, whether it's watching TV or buying things, et cetera. And now it's happening all over again. And there's many correlations that I think I'm seeing kind of history repeating itself, if you will. Except I think it's going to be with much broader and deeper implications because of the power of AI, because of there's no learning curve to be able to adopt it, and the rate of change that it's in terms of rate of improvement, which we just saw with OpenAI this week with its image creation. So we've never really seen anything like this. So you can compare the similarities between the dawn of the digital era, or the dawn of the mobile and social media era in some ways, but in other ways it's completely different. To answer your question, what I would tell my kids is that you have to either go deep into an art or deep into a science to be relevant in this future world. So either you have to lean heavily into the things that machines can't do, right? Because the machines have never ridden a roller coaster. The machines have never fallen in love. They've never broken their leg. They've never gotten hurt by somebody, right? So there's humanity that's still going to matter, right? Or you need to go deep into a science and learn how to code and operate these machines and help companies put them to work. I don't think anything in the middle is going to make sense. So, having a job where, you're jack of all trades, master of none, I think is going to put you in a really tough position. Or if you want to get a role in middle management, AI's agents are going to do the middle management, right? So figure out what side you're going to go on and lean in and really own your domain on one side or the other.
All right, let's talk about culture and commerce and that kind of like intersection. So, I've known you and we've worked together for probably 15 plus years at least. And you've always been someone that I look to in terms of providing, bleeding edge kind of consumer behavior insights. And in many ways, as we think about this moment, right, AI is now starting to understand our behaviors perhaps even better than we do. In some ways. And when you think about this in the context of brands and what that represents as an opportunity, if brands start to know us better than we know ourselves, do we actually stop being consumers, and then do we just ultimately become the product?
I don't think AI is ever going to know us better than we know ourselves. I think, I run a market research company during my day job called Suzy, and we have 300 employees, and we're scaling, and we work with most of the large major consumer brands that you think of. And I spent obviously a lot of time trying to figure out what the future of Suzy is in the world where, when you talk about facts being commoditized, so much types of research can be done using perplexity. Like, you don't need to conduct first party market research to understand what are the three attributes people look at before picking a brand of toothpaste, right? You can ask perplexity and get that. However, what you can't ask AI for is, how do you feel the day after the election? Right? Because AI doesn't really care about that necessarily, right? Or how did it make you feel the moment that you decided to buy a Lexus? AI would never buy a Lexus because they would buy a Toyota because it's the same engine. And a Lexus is more expensive, but AI doesn't have to worry what your neighbor is going to think about you if you drive home in a Toyota versus Lexus. So brands are emotional. Brands are not rational. And humans are more emotional. So I do think that there's a huge role in tapping into humanity. And, in market research specifically, there's this whole big movement on synthetic data, right? Like basically creating digital twins of real people that answer market research responses. I do think there's a role for that. But I think in this world, I think getting humans' voice and understanding consumers is going to be even more valuable, right? And it's going to be more precious as things move forward.
Connect that to the idea of like personalization.
Yeah.
And this actually, again, it's been a hot, much debated topic within the On Discourse community. And actually, one of our members recently on a call was sort of trying to make the argument that it's not about personalization, it's about being more personal. Those are two fundamentally different things. But like algorithmically enabled or driven personalization, like, sounds great. There's always been this kind of like huge promise in the world of kind of marketing, but it also kind of kills so much of what it means to be human, right? It sort of like flattens the kind of the surprise element. It kills spontaneity. It can reduce kind of discovery to like predictive loops. So like, talk about what it means for you and your observations around, what AI can potentially usher in or provide some support to in terms of how we can make our relationship with brands more personal.
Well, I don't think personalization and being personal are mutually exclusive. I mean, you never really talk to Coca-Cola and take it to dinner, right? So Coca-Cola is never really personal for you. Brands aren't supposed to be that, right? I think where personalization adds value, and I've actually spent probably 80 to 90% of my waking hours at work building an AI, which is because I'm not an engineer, but that's a big turn I made about 18 months ago, as you know, Toby. And now there's very little things that you can tell me that, that I wouldn't know how to build. and which is crazy considering I don't really know how to write code. And one of the things I've built is sort of a hyper personalized engine where, based upon specific data points, you can get a string of emails or texts or Slacks or whatever that's completely custom to you and gets more custom over time. And you could do that at scale. Send out a million emails, right? And a million different people will get something completely different. That's something that we've never seen before, right? And yeah, you could say Amazon knows what you bought and it'll kind of, try to show you something different. But I'm saying going really deep in terms of the individual data you're about to uncover. And I think that can unlock a lot for brands. And it means the more data a brand can get on somebody, the more that they can actually serve them things that, that really interest them and really make sense to them. And I think we're going to start seeing that with TV shows, with video games, and all sorts of modalities, because the ability to create infinite sorts of content based upon specific data signals, it continues to grow.
Let's go back to the book for a second. So in it, you write about the impact of AI on mental health. It's one thing, I think, to have an AI coach. I think it's another to mistake that for like a real connection.
Yeah.
And I think we can see the potential danger of that. I've seen my kids interact with AI under my supervision, and it's wild to see how quickly they start to sort of feel that there's a real connection there. So, how do we navigate this, man?
Well, it's really hard because Gen Alpha, the distinguishing factor about Gen Alpha is they will never know a world without AI. So for them, they're going to just think, oh, this is how humans are supposed to interact with technology, like they're people, right? Because the reason that AI is so powerful is there's no learning curve. You text it and talk to it just like you talk to a human. And as AI gets smarter and has more emotional resonance, it will kind of hook people. Perfect example. So for Suzy, we create these AI powered moderators. So instead of having to schedule a real person to do focus groups or interviews, we have an AI moderator you talk to, and people pour their heart out to this AI moderator. I was shocked that they actually do it, because once you get into the framework of talking and it sounds like a human voice, sometimes people just forget that it's actually not a real human on the other line. And I think the danger in that is it isn't a real human. And I think if younger people start to create relationships with AI powered chatbots or any other form factor, it's just rife with danger, right? And because you don't know the company behind it. We've already seen somebody tragically commit suicide, and there's a lawsuit right now, a wrongful death lawsuit against this company, Character AI, because the family is basically saying that this product, it would basically lead this teenager down the wrong direction. Mental health was a big issue, obviously, during COVID, because kids felt disconnected. I think this could actually create more of that. I'm an AI optimist. I think that there's a lot of positives going to come out of this. And I think, like every technological innovation, there will be negatives. And this is one of them. And I think parents I read a whole section on parenting in this book, even though I'm not necessarily like a psychologist or somebody who's a parenting expert, but I do have 4 kids, right, that are all different ages. And so I know a little bit about parenting. And I really thought that was important, because obviously kids need to know where to focus, but grown-ups and the workforce really needs to know how to focus, right? You're responsible for providing for a family, and you're worried every single day, is AI going to take my job? I have 300 employees. They're all worried about that, right? Exactly. And trying to keep them productive and focused and tell them where to, spend their time, when the reality is that is the case for every worker. You saw Meta laid off hundreds of engineers yesterday. That makes billions of dollars a year. So if they're going to do it, obviously every company is going to do it.
So I do want to take a couple of questions in a minute, and Shmuel, our head of discourse, will just feed me some of the questions that are coming through on the thread. But before I do, real quick, so we've been pushing this sort of idea of around sort of solving small in AI, and so the idea is basically AI transformation isn't about like some great revolution. It's about solving small human-sized problems. Right. And so if you were giving advice to either a founder or a parent in terms of where to start with AI, in particular in terms of starting small, what would be your recommendation?
So what I see a lot of people doing is, it's almost like if you walk into an all-you-can-eat buffet and you circle around because you don't know what to eat, because you can eat everything, and then you ended up wasting time and not even getting the right thing in the end. That's the problem a lot of people have with AI, is they play around with tools, but they really forget what they're trying to solve for. So for me, it's put all the tools away and just think about, what are the biggest problems that you need to solve in your life or your business? That's step 1. 2, when you identify the problem, what data can help you solve that problem? And then three, what does the solution look like? And then you could very simply go into a chat GPT and say, here's the data I have. Here's a problem what I want to solve. Here's what a solution looks like. I want you to give me step-by-step instructions. Don't give me step two until I've completed step one. And you will get there. And, an example I have is I created my own health bot, which, I aggregated 25 years of health history, and it now creates dossiers for me when I go to a doctor's office. They don't have to ask me any questions. So they spend more time treating me and less time asking me questions because I've given them everything in advance, right?
Right.
That's something that every human should have, because everybody has the problem of wanting to stay alive as long as possible, right? So that's one example. For my business, I want to solve the problem of allowing my salespeople to be more efficient. So I took 25,000 hours of Gong call transcripts and I fed them into a model. And now my sales team knows everything there is to know about what customers want in a particular category or vertical based upon those call transcripts. So they have more knowledge. So that's an example of taking the data and solving a different problem. That framework works for everything. What starts to happen is people just like, oh, I need to use all these tools. They forget what problem they need to solve. So they're not starting small and they don't actually move the needle at all.
All right, so a quick lightning round on this kind of solving small. So it's a kind of a real or hype response.
Okay.
So first question, AI tutors, within, let's say, the next 10 years, AI tutors will replace school as we know it. Real or hype?
Hype. I think that people need mentors. They need people who they can interact with. I think AI might be great assistants in the education world, but not replace teachers.
All right, Generation Alpha will never learn to drive or even need to.
The younger generation Alpha, I actually agree with that.
And in 5 years, we're going to miss making bad decisions.
I think in 5 years we'll still be making bad decisions.
Great. Awesome. All right. So we're going to have one foot in the analog, one foot in AI, or you've obviously lived through this, but I want to ask you a personal question. What is the one thing that you envy about Generation Alpha? And then what is the one thing that you pity?
I envy that they just have this incredible technology, because knowing what my personal skill sets are, if I had it at my disposal, because I'm more of a creative thinker, and I think it really is a powerful tool for creative thinkers. I think I could have even accomplished more in my life if I had it at earlier stages in a disproportionate way. I pity, or not pity, but I feel bad for the fact that of everything we've talked about, that I think it's going to keep them away from those real experiences, from experiencing, incredible things with other people, because they're going to be spending so much more time with technology. Spending more time with technology is almost a definite thing I can say about this generation, and I don't think that's a good thing.
All right, let's take a question from, well, she was one of the inventors of Alexa, so very excited that Joanna is here. Joanna Pena-Bickley, who also was one of our keynotes at our summit this week. She has a question. Applied to media, news, and personalization scale, this has created silos of truth. How do we create communal information centers in probabilistic models? Wow, what a good question.
I'm not really quite sure what that means. If you mean like bringing people together so they can, harness connectivity and have data come from that, I think.
I think we've got silos of truth, we've got misinformation. How do we really address that? How can AI help us address that by creating kind of like, new sort of opportunities to convene and connect, but around more factually based information, perhaps?
So, let me tell you, I speak about AI all the time, and depending upon where I am in the country, you have people concerned, obviously, on both sides of the aisle, so to speak, about AI, and you have a lot of people saying it's biased and it's pushing people in one direction or the other. I think avoiding bias in AI is nearly impossible, because everybody's definition of unbiased is different. And I think ultimately people have to be the arbiter of their own truth, and not require AI to be that role of truth teller, because then I think you're going to be dependent upon whatever model that you use.
So this question from Sarah Hollebeck is a phenomenal one. And I was sort of going to try and get to it, which is partly about taste, I think, and why critical thinking is an important skill, but like, how do you teach taste? And her question specifically is, how do we teach discernment in schools?
Well, I don't know if discernment has ever been taught in schools. I think discernment happens in life. I mean, I don't think teachers are trained to teach discernment or to teach taste. I think that happens through your experiences, and that happens from the minute that you're, that you come out of the womb, and your parents have certain values, and that drives your worldview and the types of decisions you make, and it continues to evolve over time based upon the people you interact with and the experiences that you have. And I never thought that was the role of schools, and I certainly don't think it will be moving forward.
Amazing. All right. Question from Solomon Rogers. How do you distinguish an AI character from a Tamagotchi?
Well, I mean, Tamagotchis, aren't they something that you can? I've never had a Tamagotchi, but isn't something that you can actually touch and feel a Tamagotchi?
It
And
is,
AI
yeah.
characters you can't. So I guess that's how I distinguish it. Interesting question.
Very interesting question. All right, let me see here. Any other questions coming in from you guys? All right. I don't think so. All right, I'm going to go back to a couple additional questions I have. So I want to go back for a second, Matt. Just a couple of things that we sort of touched on, but I think knowing who is sort of here and in the room, and as we sort of all wrestle with all our various different sort of anxieties around the future, we touched on and talked a little bit about kind of the future of jobs. And I think at the moment, the message, and it frustrates me sometimes that like we push these messages, particularly in media, around how to kind of make everybody feel comfortable about what's happening and where things are going to be, at a time where I don't think anyone can really reliably predict what the future is going to look like. And in particular, I think young kids who are very concerned about jobs and their careers and what have you are being told, don't worry. If we look back in history, new jobs always emerge during these like enormous transformational kind of moments. And we certainly saw it, during the Industrial Revolution. We saw it during the Information Revolution. And I think the same argument is being made today. But it's different, or at least it feels different. So what's your kind of way of being able to communicate to young people what the future is going to potentially look like, particularly in terms of their careers?
Well, I mean, it's hard to really map it out. No one's really a fortune teller in terms of where things are going. But it goes back to what I was saying earlier. I think to oversimplify it, you need to actually really go deep into being super right-brained or left-brained and being super technical or super on the emotive and human side and not be in the middle. I think, we pretty much know the skill sets that are needed right now. Like, for example, when OpenAI pushed out this incredible new tool where you can create all these new assets instantly, for some people, they wouldn't even know how to use it, right? Like it's not intuitive to them how to create a cool image because they're not creative enough to understand the type of image they want to create. And for those people, no matter how great the tool is, they're never really going to get the benefit of it because they don't think that way. And if you don't think that way, that's okay. Well, then you have to go on the other side and really be super technical. But if you're not technical and you're not creative, I think that, those in the middle are all the jobs where AI is taking things away. They're knowledge based, they're process based, and knowledge and process are the two things that AI does. So I think it really is about focusing on one side or the other.
All right, last question from James Cooper. When will we stop talking about AI? Because it's just how everything is made and no longer interesting to highlight, in the same way that no business calls themselves a .com anymore.
That's a great question. I would say probably in a couple of years, I think. It's probably when those legacy companies finally adopt it, because it's going to take so much longer than people think. I mean, there are still companies that I work with that are using Lotus Notes, right? So I think it's going to take a while before we see this AI-based transformation. We obviously are very biased. We generally live on the coast. We understand technology. We work for these digital companies. Most of corporate America is not nowhere near this. And there's going to be lawyers and privacy and data security and so much is going to get in the way. So it'll probably be longer than we think.
All right. So everyone here, we promised you a free book. Matt's been very generous. The book comes out in May, I believe, Matt. That's right.
Yep.
So how do the attendees joining us here today get a copy of your free book?
So I created a tool talking about personalization called the AI Readiness Report, where basically you fill out your information and then it goes into your LinkedIn, takes information from you and gives you an idea of the things you should focus on in AI. And it's at aireadinessreport.com. So if you go there and you complete the report, I'll get your information and we'll ask you for your address and we'll send you a free book. It doesn't take long. You have to just fill out your name, your email address, and your LinkedIn profile, and that's it.
All right, let me just drop the link into the chat here. There you go, everyone. AI Readiness Report. Matt, thank you so much. Thanks Jesse. Thanks, Matt. Appreciate your time.
The Speed of Culture is brought to you by Suzy as part of the Adweek Podcast Network and A-Guest Creator Network. You can listen and subscribe to all Adweek's podcasts by visiting adweek.com/podcasts. To find out more about Suzy, head to Suzy.com. And make sure to search for The Speed of Culture in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere else podcasts are found. Click follow so you don't miss out on any future episodes. On behalf of the team here at Suzy, thanks for listening.